My name is Ethan Hayes. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my life I've considered myself a reasonably capable man. I spent 8 years in the Army, did a couple of tours, and learned how to handle myself in places where the world was actively trying to kill you. When I got out, I settled into a career as a land surveyor. It was quiet work that kept me outdoors, which I liked. I've spent more nights under the stars than most people have spent in hotel rooms. I know the woods. I know their sounds, their rhythms, and the animals that call them home. Or at least, I thought I did. What I'm about to tell you is the reason I no longer sleep without a light on. It's the reason I sold my share of the hunting lease my family had held for 3 generations. And it's the reason I'll never again set foot in the deep woods of East Texas. The story starts, as so many do, with a tradition. Every year, the first week of November, my best friend Jake and I would head out to our lease. It was a 2,000-acre slice of heaven and hell deep in the Sam Houston National Forest, a tangled mess of piney woods, murky creeks, and thick underbrush that could swallow a man whole if he wasn't careful. The cabin wasn't much, just a single-room affair built by our grandfathers with creosote logs and a tin roof, but it was ours. It sat at the end of a long, rutted gravel road that was more of a suggestion than an actual thoroughfare. Getting there was half the adventure. This particular year, Jake brought along his cousin, Brian. Brian was younger, maybe 25, full of that particular brand of confidence that only comes from never having been truly tested. He was a city kid, an accountant or something similar, and he viewed the trip as a rustic getaway, a chance to play lumberjack for a weekend. Jake and I were hesitant, but he was family, so we agreed. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. The air was crisp, holding the first real chill of autumn. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue. It was perfect. We spent the first few hours just settling in, a comfortable ritual honed over decades. We unloaded the gear from my truck, rifles, coolers full of food and beer, ammo boxes, and our personal packs. Brian was enthusiastic but clumsy, nearly dropping his brand-new top-of-the-line rifle twice. Jake gave him a patient lesson on firearm safety for the 10th time, his voice calm but firm. I aired out the cabin, sweeping out the dust and cobwebs that had accumulated over the past year, while the scent of pine and damp earth filled the small space. Everything felt right. It felt normal. We were 3 friends, miles from civilization, ready for a weekend of peace and quiet. The irony of that thought is not lost on me now. The first sign that something was wrong came as dusk began to settle. I was sitting on the porch, cleaning my rifle, a Remington 700 that had been my father's. Jake was splitting firewood with a practiced rhythmic swing, and Brian was attempting to help by stacking it, though he mostly just got in the way. I noticed it gradually. A quiet. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of the woods at twilight. It was a dead, unnatural silence. The cicadas hadn't started their nightly chorus. There were no crickets, no birds calling their last goodbyes to the day. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath. I stopped what I was doing, listening. "You guys hear that?" I asked, my voice sounding loud in the stillness. Jake paused, his axe resting on the chopping block. He tilted his head. "Hear what? I don't hear anything." "Exactly," I said. "Nothing. It's too quiet." Brian scoffed, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "What, you expecting a marching band? It's the woods, Ethan. It's supposed to be quiet." He laughed, but it sounded a little forced. Even he, with his complete lack of experience, could feel it. The air was heavy, oppressive. It felt like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks, but the sky was clear and full of stars. We tried to brush it off. We went inside, started a fire in the old pot-bellied stove, and cooked dinner. Steaks and potatoes, fried in a cast-iron skillet. We ate, the familiar sounds of sizzling meat and clinking forks, a small comfort against the unnerving silence outside. Brian, in an attempt to lighten the mood, started telling a ghost story he'd heard, something about a spectral lumberjack. It was cheesy and predictable, but we let him talk. Halfway through his story, a sound from outside cut him off mid-sentence. It was a deep, resonant thump. It came from the direction of the dense thicket to the north of the cabin, maybe 100 yards out. It was followed by another thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone was hitting a massive tree with a sledgehammer, a slow, deliberate rhythm. We all froze, forks halfway to our mouths. "What the hell was that?" Brian whispered. his bravado gone, replaced by a wide-eyed stare. Jake stood up and walked to the door, peering through the small window. "Probably a dead tree falling," he said, though his voice lacked conviction, "or a big hog rubbing against a trunk." "That didn't sound like a hog," I said, my hand instinctively going to the stock of my rifle, which was leaning against the wall next to me. The thumping stopped as suddenly as it had started, and the oppressive silence rushed back in to fill the void. We waited, listening, for a long time. Nothing. We tried to finish our meal, but the appetite was gone. The conversation was stilted, our ears strained for any other unusual sound. We chalked it up to nerves, to the isolation getting to us. We told ourselves it was a bear, or a falling branch, or some other perfectly logical thing. But deep down, in that place that instinct lives, I knew it wasn't. It was the first stitch in a tapestry of wrongness that was just beginning to unfold. That night, sleep was a long time coming. Every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind that rustled the pines sounded like a footstep. I lay in my bunk, staring up at the dark ceiling, my mind replaying the thumping sound. It wasn't random, like a falling tree. It had a cadence, a purpose. I finally drifted off into a shallow, uneasy sleep, the kind that offers no rest. The next morning, the world seemed to have reset itself. The sun was bright, birds were singing, and the oppressive silence was gone. The events of the previous night felt like a dream, a trick of the fading light and our imaginations. Brian was back to his usual self, joking about how we were all spooked by nothing. Jake and I exchanged a look. We were both experienced enough to know that the woods had moods, and last night's mood had been a dark one, but in the clear light of day, it was easy to push the unease aside. We had a day of hunting ahead of us. Our plan was to split up. Jake would take the east ridge, I would head south toward the creek, and we'd put Brian in a stationary blind overlooking a clearing where we'd set up a deer feeder. It was the safest place for him and offered the best chance of seeing something. Before we left, I decided to check on that feeder. It was a heavy-duty, 55-gallon steel drum mounted on thick metal legs, filled with corn. It was designed to withstand anything the woods could throw at it, including the persistent efforts of black bears. When I got to the clearing, I stopped dead in my tracks. The feeder was destroyed. It wasn't just knocked over, it was mangled. The steel drum was ripped open, torn like it was a soda can. The thick metal legs were bent at grotesque angles, twisted out of their concrete footings. Corn was scattered everywhere. My first thought was a bear, a big one. But the closer I looked, the less sense it made. The tears in the metal were too clean, too sharp, and there were deep gouges in the steel, 5 parallel scratches that looked for all the world like something had raked it with massive claws. A bear would have battered it, dented it, maybe pulled it over. This was different. This was brute force combined with a kind of deliberate, destructive precision. I knelt, examining the ground. The soil was soft from a recent rain. There were tracks. They were huge, far larger than any bear track I had ever seen. And they weren't the right shape. They were long, almost like a human footprint, but the heel was narrow and the front splayed out into 5 distinct toes, each one tipped with a deep claw mark. But the most disturbing part was the stride. The tracks were in a straight line, one in front of the other. It walked on 2 legs. My blood ran cold. I stood up and backed away slowly, scanning the tree line. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. I pulled out my phone, not for service, there was none, but for the camera. I took several pictures of the tracks, of the destroyed feeder. Evidence. For what? I didn't know yet. But my military training kicked in. Document everything. I jogged back to the cabin, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When I showed Jake the photos, the color drained from his face. He was a man not easily rattled, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He'd seen the same things I had, the bipedal tracks, the impossible damage. Brian, however, was skeptical. "Come on, guys," he said, trying for a casual tone. "It's probably just some local rednecks messing with us. They saw we were here and decided to pull a prank." "With what, Brian?" I asked, my voice tight. "Their bare hands? Did they fake these tracks with clown shoes? Look at the bend in that steel leg. It would take a hydraulic press to do that." "Maybe they used a truck and a chain," he offered weakly. "And then walked away on 2 legs, leaving tracks bigger than my boots?" Jake countered, his patience wearing thin. Use your head. Something big did this, something we don't have an explanation for. The argument went back and forth, but it was clear our hunting trip was over before it had even begun. The unease from the night before had returned, now solidified into a tangible, specific threat. We decided to stick together, to stay close to the cabin for the rest of the day. We wouldn't hunt. We would watch, and we would wait. We brought all the firearms inside, loaded them, and propped them against the walls. A small arsenal of rifles and shotguns. It felt both foolish and necessary at the same time. As the day wore on, the tension in the small cabin became almost unbearable. Every snap of a twig outside made us jump. We tried to play cards, but no one could focus. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a beautiful scene that filled me with nothing but dread. Darkness was coming, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever had destroyed the feeder would be back. Night fell like a shroud. We had a fire going in the stove, casting flickering shadows on the walls. We'd boarded up the smaller back window with some old planks we found under the cabin. The main front window, a large single pane of glass, we covered with a thick blanket. We were in a wooden box, our own self-made trap. Around 10 o'clock, it started. A faint scratching sound from the back wall. It was soft at first, exploratory. Scrape, scrape, scrape. We all froze, looking at each other in the dim light of the lanterns. Jake held up a hand, signaling for silence. He crept to the back door, his shotgun held at the ready. I took up a position near the front window, my rifle in my hands. Brian huddled near the stove, his face pale and slick with sweat. The scratching stopped. A moment later, we heard a low guttural sniff right under the front window. It was loud, wet, and impossibly close. It sounded like a huge animal trying to catch our scent through the cracks in the old log walls. I could feel the vibration of it through the floorboards. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure it could be heard outside. Then, the doorknob on the front door began to jiggle. Slowly at first, then more violently. It wasn't the random fumbling of an animal. It was a deliberate, intelligent attempt to open the door. It knew what a doorknob was. It knew how it worked. That was the moment my carefully constructed wall of rationalization crumbled into dust. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. Something that walked on two legs, had immense strength, and possessed a terrifying problem-solving intelligence. "It's trying to get in," Brian whimpered, his voice cracking. "Shut up," Jake hissed, not taking his eyes off the back door. The rattling at the front doorknob stopped. A heavy silence descended again, pregnant with menace. I risked a peek through a small gap in the blanket covering the window. For a second, I saw nothing but the familiar yard, bathed in the cold, bluish light of the moon. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the tree line and moved across the edge of the clearing. It was huge. It moved with a loping, unnatural gait, a predator's stride. It was silhouetted against the moonlight, a towering figure that was too tall and lean to be a bear, yet too massive to be a man. It walked on two slightly bent legs, its long arms swinging at its sides. As it passed through a patch of direct moonlight, I saw it turn its head toward the cabin. I caught a glimpse of a long canine snout, pointed ears, and the unmistakable glint of moonlight reflecting off a pair of eyes, yellow-green. They seemed to stare right at me, right through the wall, right into my soul. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness on the other side of the yard. I stumbled back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. "I saw one," I choked out. "It's out there, big, like a wolf on two legs." Before anyone could respond, a rock hit the side of the cabin with a deafening crash, then another and another. They were throwing things at us, testing us, trying to flush us out. The methodical thumping from the night before now made a terrifying kind of sense. It wasn't a falling tree. It was a display, a territorial claim. And we had trespassed. This is where Brian made his fatal mistake. The fear and tension had been coiling inside him all day, and now it snapped. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his rifle. "I've had enough of this," he yelled, his voice shrill with panic and a foolish surge of adrenaline. "Brian, no!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. He tore the blanket from the front window and stormed onto the porch, pointing his rifle into the darkness. "Get out of here! Leave us alone!" For a heart-stopping second, there was silence. Then, from the tree line about 60 yards out, a figure rose to its full height. It was the thing I had seen, but now it was fully illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the tall pines. The sight of it will be burned into my memory until the day I die. It stood at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its body was a grotesque parody of a man's, with massive, heavily muscled shoulders and a narrow waist. Its long, powerful arms hung down past its knees, ending in large, almost human-like hands tipped with thick black claws. Its legs were digitigrade, bent backward like a dog's, ending in huge clawed feet. But the head? The head was the stuff of pure nightmare. It was the head of a monstrous wolf or a German shepherd, with a long snout, powerful jaws, and pointed ears that twitched, listening. Its fur was a matted dark gray, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent yellow-green light. It opened its mouth, and a sound came out that was not of this world. It started as a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in my chest, then it rose in pitch to a deafening, ear-splitting scream. It was a horrifying symphony of a wolf's howl, a man's scream of agony, and the shriek of tearing metal all blended into one. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated violence and hatred. It was at this moment, driven by some reporter's instinct I didn't know I had, that I fumbled for my phone. I'd been meaning to try and record the strange sounds from the night before. I hit the record button, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I wanted proof. I needed something to show the world that I wasn't crazy. Brian stood frozen on the porch, paralyzed by terror. The creature took a step forward, and that's when 2 more figures emerged from the darkness, one on each side of it. A pack. They were flanking us. The one in the middle let out another of those blood-curdling screams, and it broke Brian's paralysis. He raised his rifle and fired. 1 shot, 2, 3, a frantic, panicked volley into the darkness. I don't think he hit anything. It was the worst possible thing he could have done. He had just declared war. The attack was immediate and terrifyingly coordinated. They didn't charge blindly across the clearing. The 2 on the flanks melted back into the trees, circling toward the sides of the cabin, while the one in the center dropped to all 4s and sprinted forward with blinding speed, covering the 60 yards in seconds. It was a blur of dark fur and pumping limbs. "Get inside!" I screamed, grabbing Brian's shirt and hauling him back into the cabin, slamming the door just as the creature crashed against it. The entire frame shuddered. A deep, snarling growl came from the other side, accompanied by the splintering sound of claws digging into the thick wood. "Barricade it!" Jake yelled. We shoved the heavy oak dining table against the door, the creature outside roaring in frustration and slamming its body against it again and again. Each impact felt like a car crash. At the same time, we heard clawing at the walls on both sides of the cabin, and then a loud crash as one of the side windows shattered, the boards we'd nailed over it splintering inward. A long clawed arm reached through the broken window, swiping blindly, trying to find purchase. Jake was there in an instant, leveling his shotgun and firing. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. The arm recoiled with a wet, gurgling shriek of pain. But a moment later, another arm, this one from the other side of the cabin, smashed through the main front window, glass and the blanket we'd hung exploding into the room. It was chaos. We were being besieged, systematically taken apart by intelligent, relentless predators. I fired my rifle through the broken front window at the shape I could see moving out there. The muzzle flash illuminated a snarling face, jaws snapping, eyes burning with hate. The bullet must have hit it, because it staggered back with a yelp, but it didn't go down. They were smart, terrifyingly smart. The one at the front, the one I'd shot, began to circle around, drawing our attention, while the one at the back, the one Jake had wounded, renewed its assault on the rear door. It wasn't just clawing anymore. It was ramming the door with its shoulder, the hinges groaning in protest. The third one, which had been silent, did something that broke what little composure I had left. It picked up the heavy, solid oak picnic table from the yard, a table that took 4 men to move, lifted it over its head with what seemed like no effort, and hurled it at the front wall of the cabin. The impact was catastrophic. The entire cabin shook on its foundations. The lanterns we had lit were knocked over, plunging us into near darkness, the only light now coming from the dying embers in the stove and the cold moonlight streaming through the shattered windows. Brian screamed, a raw, terrified sound. In the confusion and darkness, one of the creatures saw its chance. It surged through the broken front window, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. It was on Brian before he could even raise his rifle. I saw a massive, dark shape, the glint of claws, and then Brian was gone, dragged back out through the window with a choked, gurgling cry that was cut off abruptly. For a second, Jake and I just stood there, stunned into inaction by the sheer speed and brutality of it. Then a wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over Jake. "Brian!" he screamed, his voice breaking. He ran to the window, emptying his shotgun into the darkness where his cousin had disappeared. I heard a pained howl, different from the aggressive screams before. It was a yelp of genuine agony. This was our chance. The creatures were momentarily disorganized. I could hear two of them making pained, snarling noises out in the yard, one of them presumably tending to the one Jake had hit hard. Their focus was broken. It was now or never. "Jake, the truck!" I yelled, grabbing him by the shoulder. "We have to go now. We can't stay here." He looked at me, his face a mask of grief and fury, illuminated by the faint moonlight. He nodded, his jaw set. The cabin was a death trap. Our only hope was my truck, parked about 40 yards away, just at the edge of the clearing where the gravel road began. "On my count," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I'll go first. Lay down cover fire. You follow right behind me. Don't stop for anything. Just run." I took a deep breath, chambered a new round in my rifle, and counted. 3, 2, 1, go! I burst out the front door, turning to my left and firing toward the sounds of the creatures near the tree line. The muzzle flash lit up a horrific scene. One of the beasts was crouched over Brian's still form, while another, the one Jake had shot, was on the ground, struggling to get up, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. The third one, the alpha, was standing over them, its head snapping in our direction, its eyes locking onto mine. It let out a roar of pure fury. Jake was right behind me. We sprinted across the cold, damp grass of the clearing, our boots slipping in the mud. The 40 yards to the truck felt like a mile. The air was filled with the sounds of our ragged breaths, our pounding feet, and the enraged screams of the monsters behind us. I could hear them coming, the heavy, thudding footfalls of something massive running on 2 legs. I reached the driver's side door, fumbling with the keys, my fingers numb and clumsy. "Get in!" I yelled at Jake, who was already wrenching the passenger door open. I finally got the key in the lock, twisted it, and threw myself into the driver's seat. The engine turned over on the first try, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. I slammed the truck into gear just as Jake tumbled into the seat beside me. A massive impact rocked the truck from the side. One of the creatures had slammed into the passenger door, its claws screeching as they scraped down the metal. Jake screamed and fired his shotgun through his open window, the blast echoing in the cab. The creature recoiled, but another one was already on us. As I stomped on the accelerator, the alpha creature launched itself onto the hood of the truck. Its monstrous, wolf-like face was suddenly there, inches from the windshield, its yellow eyes burning into mine, its mouth open in a silent snarl, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth. Its weight made the front of the truck sag. It raised a clawed hand and brought it down on the windshield. A spiderweb of cracks exploded across the glass, but it held. It raised its hand again. I cranked the steering wheel hard to the left, then hard to the right. The truck fishtailed wildly on the loose gravel, and the creature, caught off balance, was thrown from the hood. It rolled and came up on its feet with terrifying agility, roaring in frustration as I straightened out and floored it. We rocketed down that gravel road, the truck bouncing and sliding, the trees a blur on either side. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I just drove, my foot pressed to the floor, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. We drove like that for what felt like an eternity, expecting at any moment to see one of them burst from the trees alongside us. But we saw nothing. The only sounds were the roar of the engine, the rattling of the truck, and our own ragged, desperate gasps for air. We didn't slow down until we hit the paved county road, until the familiar glow of a distant town appeared on the horizon. Only then did I ease my foot off the accelerator. The truck was a wreck. The passenger side was dented and deeply scratched, the windshield was shattered, and the hood was dented where the creature had landed. We were covered in dirt, sweat, and splatters of blood that wasn't ours. Jake was slumped in his seat, his shotgun across his lap, staring blankly ahead. He was muttering Brian's name over and over again. We drove straight to the sheriff's department in the next county over. We stumbled into the brightly lit office, 2 wild-eyed men looking like they'd just crawled out of a grave. The deputy at the desk, a young man with a bored expression, looked up from his magazine, his eyes widening at the sight of us. Trying to tell the story was nearly impossible. Our words tumbled out, a chaotic, hysterical mess of monsters, claws, screams, and Brian. I tried to be methodical, to report it like I would have in the army, but the terror was a physical thing, choking the words in my throat. I showed the deputy the pictures on my phone, the mangled feeder, the enormous, non-human tracks. He looked at them with a detached, professional skepticism. "So you're saying you were attacked," he said slowly, as if talking to children. "By what exactly? Some kind of wolfmen?" "I don't know what they were," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "I'm telling you what we saw. They were tall, 8 feet maybe. They had dog heads. They killed my friend's cousin. His name was Brian. They took him." They took our statements, separating us into different rooms. I went over it again and again, trying to make them understand the intelligence, the coordination of the attack. They listened with polite, impassive faces. They took our rifles for ballistics testing and swabbed our hands for gunshot residue. It felt less like an investigation and more like a procedure they had to get through. 2 deputies eventually drove out to the lease. They were gone for hours. When they came back, their expressions were set, unreadable. The senior deputy, a man named Henderson with a thick mustache and tired eyes, sat down across from me. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his tone weary. "We found the scene. There was a lot of damage to the cabin, and we found the remains of Mr. O'Connell." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The preliminary assessment from the game warden is that your camp was attacked by a large and unusually aggressive black bear." I just stared at him, a cold, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. "A bear?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Did you see the feeder? Did you see the tracks? A bear didn't throw a picnic table through a wall. A bear didn't try to open the door." "The tracks were inconclusive," he said, flipping through his notepad. "Too much disturbance at the scene. As for the rest, well, fear can make things seem different than they are. Your friend was killed by a wild animal. It's a tragic, horrible thing. But it was a bear." He wouldn't look me in the eye. The official story was set. Brian O'Connell killed in a tragic animal attack. The 2 survivors, Ethan Hayes and Jake Miller, were suffering from shock and trauma, their fantastical stories a product of hysteria. The case was closed before it was ever really opened. My photos were dismissed as unclear. The audio file on my phone, which I offered to play for them, was waved away as irrelevant. They didn't want to see, they didn't want to hear. It was easier to file it under bear attack and move on. We were left with our trauma, our grief, and a truth that no one would ever believe. A few days later, as we were making arrangements for Brian's funeral, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was an old game warden, a man who had been at the scene but hadn't spoken to us. His name was Roy. He asked if he could meet me for coffee, said it was off the record. I agreed, desperate for anyone to validate what had happened. We met at a small diner halfway between my house and his. He was an older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles from a life spent in the sun. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I saw the tracks before the deputies trampled all over them," he said, stirring his coffee. "I saw the feeder. I've been working these woods for 40 years. That wasn't any bear I've ever seen." A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to tears. "So you believe us?" He took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes fixed on something far away. "Belief doesn't have much to do with it. I know what I saw, and I've heard stories, not just from folks like you, from loggers, from other hunters, even from a deputy who quit the force 20 years ago. Stories about things that walk on 2 legs, things that shouldn't exist. They usually come from that specific part of the forest. My granddaddy used to call it the bad woods, said some places are just wrong." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low conspirator. "Listen to me. The official report is the official report. You fight it, they'll paint you as crazy. You'll lose your job, your friends, everything. They don't want this kind of thing getting out. It's bad for tourism, bad for logging, bad for everything. So they bury it, every time." "So we're just supposed to forget?" I asked, the anger rising in me again. "They killed Brian." "You don't forget," Roy said, his gaze hardening. "You learn. You were lucky. You got out. Most people in those stories don't. My advice to you, sell your lease. Never go back there. Tell your friend the same. You poked the hive, and you're damn lucky you didn't get stung to death. Don't go back for more." He finished his coffee, stood up, put a $5 bill on the table, and looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry for your loss, son, and I'm sorry I can't do more." Then he walked out, leaving me alone with the terrible, officially non-existent truth. That was 2 years ago. I did what Roy said. I sold my share of the lease to Jake, though he never went back either. He sold it a year later to a timber company. Our friendship, once forged in the easy camaraderie of the hunt, is now a fragile, brittle thing, held together by a shared trauma we can never speak of to anyone else. We see each other occasionally, but the conversation is always strained. We look at each other, and all we see is the ghost of his cousin and the reflection of our own terror. I don't hunt anymore. I sold my father's rifle, the one I used to clean with such care on the porch of that cabin. The feel of a firearm in my hands now only brings back the memory of its uselessness against them. The joy I once found in the quiet solitude of the wilderness is gone, replaced by a gnawing, persistent fear. I live in the city now. I can't stand the silence of the country. I need the noise of traffic, of sirens, of people. I need to be reminded that the world of men is still here, holding the darkness at bay, but the darkness is always there, at the edges. I have nightmares. I see those glowing yellow-green eyes, that snarling canine face, and I hear the screams. That sound is etched into my brain. I still have the audio file on my phone, a digital ghost. I've never listened to it again. I can't, but I can't bring myself to delete it either. It's my only proof, my terrible little secret. Sometimes late at night when the city quiets down, I think I can hear it. That low, rumbling growl just at the edge of hearing. My name is Ethan Hayes. I'm a survivor, but I'm also a haunted man. I'm isolated by a truth that sounds like madness. I'm here telling you this not for sympathy or for belief, but as a warning. The world is older and stranger than we think. There are still deep, dark corners where evolution took a different path, where nightmares walk on two legs. So if you are ever out in the woods, far from any road, and the forest goes suddenly, unnaturally silent, do not try to rationalize it. Do not try to be brave. Turn around, get in your car, and drive away. Do not wait to find out what is holding its breath and watching you from the trees. Some things are not meant to be seen, and some screams once heard can never be unheard. You have to believe me. For Brian, you have to.